Hey guys, this is Butch. I want to thank you for checking in today. The video today is just a small Bible discussion we had with our small group during the second church service. Kind of a mixture of simply the story and a discovery Bible study method, and just hope you enjoy. Thanks for clicking on the link. Of the Jewish people. So that was our story from last week, and so this is our story from this week. When I'll start with the verse you guys have. As soon as Peter realized this, he went to the house of Mary, who was the mother of John, who's also called Mark, where many had assembled and were praying. And so he knocked on the door of the outer gate, and a servant named Rhoda came to answer. She recognized Peter's voice, and because of her joy, she didn't open the gate. But she ran back inside and announced that Peter was standing at the outer gate. "You're out of your mind," they told her. But she kept insisting that it was true. And they said, "Oh, it's his angel." Peter, however, kept knocking on the gate. And when they opened the door, they were amazed. And motioning to them with his hand to be silent, Peter described to them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison. And he said, "Tell these things to James and the brothers." And then he left and went to another place. Now at daylight, there was a great commotion among the guards as to what had become of Peter. And after Herod had searched and couldn't find Peter, he interrogated the guards and ordered their execution. Then Herod went down from Judea to Caesarea and stayed there. Right? So would somebody like to try to tell as much as you can remember that? And it's okay if you don't get it all right, but we'll fill in the blanks with our minds, so it still helps us. From the part where it says, as soon as he realized this, he went to the house of one called Mary, whose son was John, also called Mark.
Started knocking at the door insistently. Then a woman named Rhoda opened the door, realized it was Peter, told the rest of the congregation. Oh wait, sorry. Totally skipped a lot of people.
That's okay.
Yeah. Was at a house of Mary with a son named John, also called Mark, where a lot of people were assembled to prayer. And Peter walked to the door and knocked. A woman named Rhoda came up, realized it was him, told the rest of the brethren, and they said it must be his angel. And then Peter came in and not rehearsed, but told everything that already happened. And then Herod interrogated the prisoners and ordered their execution. And then ends with Peter going down from Judea to Caesarea.
Very, very good. Yeah, excellent. Now, one thing there at the end, it was Herod that went from Judea to Caesarea.
Okay,
so that's okay. That's all right. But I mean, you got everything in the order. It was good. So as soon as Peter realized this, he went to the house of Mary, whose son was John, who was also called Mark. Yeah. And what was going on there?
They were praying.
Yeah, the believers had assembled together. They gathered together to pray for Peter, right? And as he knocked on the door of the outer gate, who
a girl named Rhoda.
Yeah, a servant girl named Rhoda came, and when she
Saul heard him.
she heard him and recognized it was Peter.
She was so excited she forgot to let him in.
Yeah, she didn't let him in. This is one of the funniest stories in all the New Testament. And she goes inside and she goes, what?
Peter's outside the gate.
Yeah, Peter's at the outer gate.
I said,
And-
must be his angel.
And even before that, they did. They said that, but they said, you,
Oh,
Must be mistaken.
No, you're
Crazy.
crazy.
you're crazy. Yeah, you have lost your mind. But she insisted. And then they said,
Must be his angel.
must be his
yeah,
angel.
must be his angel. And so when they opened the door and they saw, because Peter kept knocking. So when they opened the door and saw it was him,
Peter told them to be quiet.
yeah, he motioned with his hands to be quiet. They were amazed, right? And then Peter told them, what? All that
Had happened in prison.
Yeah, all that God had done for him in prison. And then he said, go and tell
Brethren.
James
And the brother.
James and the other brothers. That's an important little detail that we'll talk about here in a little bit. And then he left and went to another place. Right now, at daylight, there was what among the soldiers?
confusion.
Yeah, a great commotion among the soldiers as to what had become of Peter, right? And after Herod had searched and didn't find him, what did he do?
Interrogated the prisoners.
He interrogated the
Or
guards.
that's right, yeah.
Yeah, he interrogated the guards, and then he
Commanded their execution.
commanded their execution. Not a good day. Then Herod went down from Judea to Caesarea and stayed there. So I mean, what do you think it might have been like for Peter to? I mean, so, he kind of goes through this whole escape thing in a daze, right? Like, oh, what a cool dream, and then it's going, oh, wait, this is real, and then he makes his way to the door, and he's. And he hears somebody coming, and then they leave him. So what do you think that might have been like for him?
I just find it interesting that he went to Mary's house in the first place,
Yeah,
out of the entire
Yeah.
area.
yeah. And we're going to talk about that.
Oh, okay.
We're going to talk about that for sure. Because I do think it's important.
But Peter.
What do you think it's like for him standing outside in the street?
I would be kind of worried the guards would recognize
Somebody
me.
go find me.
Yeah, it's like, welcome back.
Well, it's like, in last week's story, he was kind of in this daze, just thinking that what he was experiencing was all a vision, and then didn't recognize that it wasn't a vision, that it was reality once the angel left. So then it's kind of like, oh my goodness, but then whoa, I'm fully exposed now. Like, this angel is not present to guard and protect. So I would have been knocking vigorously as well.
Likewise, it's kind of like I was talking about when we were talking about earlier about when Andrew mentioned the details of the making of the, Isn't it strange the detail that's gone into about the story and how someone felt outside the gate?
Yeah.
We're speculating how they might have felt outside the gate and what was going on with the excitement inside. Oh, you're crazy. It's not, just the fact that we're listening to or reading those details is pretty.
Yeah.
There's got to be reasoning behind it. It causes you to ponder what the story is telling us.
Well, let's look at the first part of this story. So, after Peter kind of came to himself and realized, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, who was also called Mark, where they had assembled together, or many had assembled together and were praying. And he started knocking on the outer gate. And a servant girl named Rhoda came, and when she recognized it was Peter, she didn't open the door, but went inside and told him, Peter's outside the gate. And they said, you're nuts. But she kept insisting. And they said, it must be his angel. Right? So we'll just kind of stop right there. Right? So what do we learn about the early church from the fact that Peter knew where to go? I mean, what does that tell us about their spiritual habits as a small body of believers? But not small at this point. You know, at this point, there's thousands of believers.
Sounds like it's a safe bet that they always meet in that same place. If he went there.
Okay, yeah, seems like it's kind of a spiritual gathering place. Yeah. Do we learn anything about the size of Mary's house?
We could fit many.
Yeah, it said many fit there. And by the way, for us, you know, we see a house, we have a yard, and there's a driveway, and that's what a house is, right? In most parts of the world, the first thing you see in a house is a fence, a wall, with a gate that opens up, and then a lot of times an inner gate in that. So, you know, we typically read the Bible from our cultural perspective, but this would have been the whole street would have essentially been walled off, right? Every yard would have been walled. Nobody. When I show people pictures of my house with the yard in most places, one of the first things people say is, "Where's your wall? Where's your wall?" They literally cannot picture a house without a wall.
Give us a few more years, we're getting there.
Yeah. Well, some places are already there, but yeah. So, I mean, what does this tell us of Peter's expectation of the church's response to his arrest?
Yeah, it seemed he went there on purpose, you know, and so it seems that he was trusting that they were gathering, whether it was a regular time or not. Like he trusted that they were praying on his behalf, or doing something on his behalf, or that they would have been the ones, whoever was there would have been the ones who would have wanted to know what happened.
Yeah.
Like the first ones to hear it.
He must have been very excited to tell what had just happened to him as well. You know, like looking for somebody to tell this story to. I've just, doors opened and the chains, you know, were
walked
gone.
by guards
right.
who didn't see us.
So he's probably told several people on the way to, you know, just, yeah.
Which is such a funny contrast when you think. So apparently, since he kept knocking, this door was locked, or else he would have just gone in.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's like he can't even get his own people to open the door, but yet God is the one like throwing open
the jail.
all the doors.
I hadn't thought about that, the contrast.
Yeah, it's comical.
That is funny.
That is funny. I hadn't seen that either. So, so the many believers are gathered. We don't want to say the church, and at this point, still there are no Christians.
Chapter 11.
Was it chapter 11 that they were first called Christian? Okay, I missed it. Thank you. Call me out. I'm going to erase that from the video.
I could be wrong.
Yeah,
I'm going to go with you're right.
Yeah.
If he's wrong, we'll send him out next week. You won't get him.
But what do we learn about these early believers? I mean, what else could they have been doing? Because they know why Peter's in prison, right? They know he's in there to die. So rather than praying, what else could they have been doing?
Could have been petitioning for him to be released.
Okay.
Or petitioning man, I guess.
Yeah.
Could have been scheming.
Yeah. Who can we bribe? Who can we bribe to get this thing?
Yeah, because we were talking last week, like they would have already been in so much grief since John had just been killed. So it's like, let's not let this happen again. You know, like what can we do to keep And when we're grieved, we're not always thinking clearly. So.
Yeah, which makes me think, because James has only been dead for a very short period of
I
time
said
now.
John. Sorry, James.
But what do you think the atmosphere was like for these believers as they're gathered together? And as far as they know, the second person of the inner circle is about to die. So what do you think it was like? What do you see that prayer meeting looking like?
I see a dual aspect. Like, I was talking to somebody about church history with, like, I love Torch Lighters, that episode on just, what's her name, Perpetua, and, like, reading other stuff outside of kids' show on it, but just seeing the beauty of her walk with the Lord in the face of persecution and the prayer meetings that went on, or rejoicing, because she's not dead, she's more alive than ever, in the same way Peter would be, but also grieving of just like, wow, we live in a fallen world where this person's getting murdered.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned that, Perpetua and the martyrs that were to come. But I wonder, at this stage of the development of the church, martyrdom is still relatively new, for lack of a better term. So do you see maybe a process of the people trying to get a handle on what can we learn about God as His children, that this is going on?
Are they... The Judaism, is it new? I know Christianity, but like I think of like Jeremiah or Isaiah.
Yeah, there were prophets who were killed, but for the Christians, I mean, they gathered there in Jerusalem for a long time, and it's only been since Stephen that this has been new.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, are there other examples? Why would they assume it's his angel?
We're going to talk about that. That's a great question. So we're going to. That is a good question. We're getting there. Don't let us forget that, because I do want to talk about that. So Rhoda hears his voice, right, and she is so excited. Now she's a servant girl, so going along with so she was $5 an hour minimum wage.
She was a slave.
But also a believer, I guess.
And a believer serving a believer.
And Mary seems to be really wealthy.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's, we tend to see everything from our eyes, culturally and time-wise. But for them, it was the life that was life around them, right? And especially at this point. So let's say she was a slave girl. So at this point in history, what could the church do to do away with slavery?
If they had a slave, they could free them.
Okay, individuals could free slaves. But once that slave was free, what could they do to earn a living?
Nothing. They could probably just go back to slavery.
Yeah, see, so for us, we see these answers, they're cut and dried.
Yeah.
Because it's the way we see it. And yet, it was a lot, it wasn't until the church really grew and became more powerful that the church became the instrument of doing away with slavery, which we kind of get lost in our cultural discussions today. So what do we learn about Rhoda? That she recognized Peter's voice.
She knew him pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
Because I wouldn't know, maybe I'm just not the best listener when it comes to like recognizing someone's voice. Like I would recognize your voice if you're knocking on a door, but it would take me very, very long to possibly understand if Paige was speaking over Pam Vernon or over like another woman, unless you have a thick accent.
Yeah, and if it was Kurt now, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference.
Well, but too, like,
Yeah.
they're expecting them. Everyone is expecting that Peter is dead. So even if she knows his voice well, like, I would have struggled to trust myself
That's
that
not a
that
good thing.
was who was at the gate. Do you know? It's
Yeah.
like, wait, no, I'm just wanting to hear that. That couldn't really be. But she had full confidence in what she heard.
Well,
It makes me think that, it's just God wanted her specifically to go that gate. Because because when she came back, they were doubtful. And it, obviously it mentions that she was a servant girl for a reason. There's a
Yeah.
reason it mentions
Yeah.
that. It makes
Yeah.
me wonder, like, well, what if it had been one of the spiritual leaders that went up, and what if they came back like, oh wow, Peter's here? But maybe it's almost like it's like a test of faith almost.
oh, wow. Yeah.
That's how I see it.
Well, and calls her a girl, so she would have been young. So it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
the faith of a child again, like the innocence, the belief, the trust there.
So, I mean, what do we learn about this early group of believers, though, that, I mean, this terrible thing has happened, and they fully expect, I mean, it seems to be pretty obvious, we talked about this last week, that the Jews knew what was going to happen to Peter. They were like, they had an expectation, we're told from the story. But what do we learn about their faith from the fact they're gathered together praying for Peter? I mean, what do you learn about these early believers?
Like we said earlier, they could have been scheming, they could have been petitioning or something, but they obviously still had a great amount of faith in God to still be praying. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people at that point could have lost faith, but it doesn't seem like they did.
Well, up until this time, who had been martyred?
We know Stephen.
James.
We know that Paul had people put to death, according to his testimony. We're not given specifics, but we're told that he did. And then now we have James. So we don't have a specific count, but we know it's more than two.
But James hadn't been.
Yes, James was killed just before Peter was arrested.
Was he?
James, this is the
Yeah.
James of the son of thunder,
Yeah.
not James the
this
Lord's
is
half
another
brother.
James.
So that's we talked about that last week, but
They
I
couldn't have
hadn't
been
thought
more
about
original
that.
with it, variety.
So,
There's
yeah.
so many Johns and
Yeah,
and
John's and James's. Yeah, and Jesus's. Jesus was one of the
Yeah.
most popular names of the day. So we see the early church gathering together in great faith to pray.
It doesn't say that. It doesn't even tell us that they were praying for his release. I mean, in my mind, I assumed they would be, but at the same time, it just says they were gathered together praying. It's like you wonder, were they already resolved in their minds? Well, if he allowed James to be martyred, then Peter's next. So maybe they were praying for, like, what do we do? Like, what are the next steps for the church? I don't know, but yeah.
Well, even for us as believers, our prayers change from the time that we're young believers to
Yeah.
the time that we've gone through a lot of deep waters. And you learn more every time you pray, so
Yeah.
to speak.
Oh yeah.
So these people were all fairly young, probably young believers in there. Well, obviously,
Yeah.
we're young.
Well, based on the story, do we see them praying in faith?
Considering they doubt that it's Peter at the door, and Rhoda's glad when she hears the knock. No. But I could be wrong.
I have such compassion for them, though, because of how many times I am convinced that as I'm praying, I am believing and trusting.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
then, when an answer comes, I'm shocked.
Yeah.
Do you know, And so it's like, yes, Lord, I know you can. You did it, you know. And so
Well,
it's like,
but let's talk. Is that what you see in this story?
Does it tell us the answer to that?
Peter's outside.
Yeah.
You're nuts. We're praying for Peter, but you're nuts if you think he's outside. No, I'm telling you, he's outside. It's his angel. It's his messenger. Which, so what does that tell us of in their response to Rhoda? You know, and again, this is a matter of minutes, right? That all this is taking place. What does that show us about their faith, their response to Rhoda and her message? I mean, what do you see?
God's proven himself to them right at that very minute that, you know, regardless of how they were praying or what specifically they were praying for, he's proven himself o'er and o'er, as the song says.
So you're saying God is answering their prayer even though it might not have been a prayer of tremendous faith?
Hopefully true, yes.
Well, I love the prayers that I never say out loud or even think that long of, but God still answers. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But
Yeah.
I can't even imagine what they're going through because Peter's, like, I'm not saying he's the leader, but he's one of them.
Oh, yeah, no
And
doubt.
You just lost, like, out of the 11 apostles still left, one just died, one's probably dead. Peter is kind of like one of the top dogs besides James, the brother of Jesus. So it's like, where do we go from here? What you were saying when it comes to just even the leadership and just seeing like that delayed answer to prayer, so that their faith actually increased in doubt. That's
So, I mean, what do we learn about God from the fact, I mean, if we're in agreement that they're, you know, that it wasn't like they were, God, give us this, we demand this, but rather they're praying and then they're surprised that God answers. So what do we learn about God as far as his answering prayer?
Can you repeat that question?
What do we learn about God
Yeah.
as far as his response to our praying? Do we have to have this amazing? Does he answer our prayers based on our faith?
No.
And it's up to us. We got to work it up. And what do you see in this story?
It goes back maybe because I've just read it and doing the same thing as you, going through the Bible again this year. Goes back to Moses. You know, everybody's disgruntled. Everybody needs water or food or whatever it might be, and him raising his hands up and saying, Lord, you know, what am I going to do? The people are thirsty, right?
Yeah, what am I going to do with these people?
Yeah. And these knew of stories of old of God's provision,
Yeah,
just like we know.
yeah.
So I don't know if that answers where you were going with that, but
You know, well, there's a lot of folks out there that say answers to prayer are dependent on how strong our faith is. Is that what this story teaches?
I don't think so.
I'd say just the opposite.
Yeah,
I think he works
Yeah.
in spite.
yeah.
Some, not all the time.
Spite of
Faith's
weakness
definitely
or maybe.
important, but
So based on what we see here, is it okay for these people that they're struggling in their, you know, in their faith? Or what do you?
Yeah, I feel like this is just where God's grace comes in. Like, he is a safe place to struggle.
Ooh.
You know, like
Ooh.
that we don't have to have it all figured out. Like, he didn't even in this story, I'm sticking with the story, even in this story, he didn't criticize or critique or shame them. He just showed them. Here he is. This is what I did. You know, and it's just like, I don't know, you just see such I see the compassion of God and the kindness of God. It's on display. That yes, they were praying. They may not have been praying the best of prayers, but God was saying, like, in spite of your ability to pray, like, I'm responding with my purposes and with my plans, and I'm inviting you in to see it.
Had this story been displayed that the people were praying for Peter's release, maybe the message to us is reading the story years later, all this time later, would have been a different: pray for what you want, God will provide what you're asking. And that's not the message of this. The message is pray.
Yeah. Well, Paige, something you said that when they finally let Peter in, and what I don't want to forget about the angel part, right? But when they finally let Peter in, and he explained what God did, right? So, what does that show us about God? That, I mean, here they've been praying, whether it was faithless or weak faith or whatever, now God is giving them a clear testimony of what He was doing while they were praying, right? So what does that show us about God's desire for His people, His concern for them? What do you see there?
I think having an eager expectation of God to move, but in His timing. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's a testimony of a woman in India in an orphanage, and she was praying for this child to get released from sex trafficking. And she, like, her and, like, she had 16 other kids just fasting and praying, and just, like, were prostrate on the ground for 48 hours. And they started praying, and the kid was literally released into their custody. It kind of mirrored this a lot, and I just forgot about it until recently. But I guess just that eager expectation and desperation for God to move, but in the way that He's going to and how He's going to do it in His timing.
Yeah. Well, what about, where He says it must be His angel? Does that give us any clues to where they were kind of at in their understanding of? I mean, does it seem like they thought Peter had died? And the word is not ghost, so it's angel or messenger. So
I guess it does.
And does it seem like maybe their understanding wasn't complete as far as what happens after? And again, we tend to look at every stage of the New Testament, especially the Book of Acts, from the completed stage of Scripture, right? Not forgetting that they're growing in their knowledge and understanding and revelation, that God is giving them revelation as to what happened. Like, for instance, has Paul written yet, absent from the body, present with the Lord? Do they have that to lean on? So it's some of, it's interesting when you're reading the Gospels and the Book of Acts, how much stuff is essentially religious superstition. The people's response to things. Whose parents sinned that he's blind? Right? And Jesus is like, dude, really? So, well, let's, last week we talked about the soldiers and what was going on there. So in the story here, in the morning, there was a great disturbance among the guards as they tried to find Peter and they couldn't. And Herod came and couldn't find him, and so he interrogated the guards, and when they didn't know anything, he commanded they be executed. And then he left and went down from Judea to Caesarea and stayed a while. So, we talked last week in the study that these guards kind of understood the seriousness, and the fact that Peter was chained with 2 guards, and there were guards guarding the gates, and the angel took him past at least 2 sets of sentries before the chains fell off, and that none of the guards noticed anything, right? So here, what do we learn about Peter's release, about some of the specifics from the fact when the guards started looking around, he wasn't there, and they didn't know what happened. The guards who were chained to him didn't know what happened, right? So what does that show us about Peter's release?
It's definitely supernatural.
Okay, yeah.
And I mean, it says he examined the guards, so I'm assuming he had to examine all the way from the ones who were chained to the ones guarding the gates, as they, like the process of guards that they went through. So obviously, which again is kind of like, man, no wonder if Peter thought it was a vision,
Yeah.
But the guards were oblivious.
So it says he examined them, so he sat across from the table and, okay, you better tell me what I need to know. Think that's what that looked like?
No.
Well, and I think the guards knew that their lives were on the line. Like, they would have recognized that, yeah, they were about to die as a result of this.
It seems normative. Oh, sorry for interrupting, Paige.
No, go ahead, you're good.
I don't want to. This is my one thing when I'm going outside. I'm just saying there's a precedent with Pontius Pilate.
Yeah.
When you said that, I was like, don't say anything outside scripture or out of this section. But like, it seems like this is somewhat normative when people fail, that there's a harsher punishment than you say, hey, you're fired. It's like, I'm going to kill you and set an example for the rest of you to do your job.
Yeah.
But I think it's just cool that there's even a witness to the Gentiles and to Herod, from him just interrogating or torturing or whatever that might have looked like, from them saying, I don't know, this is impossible, and just the supernatural witness that's actually Herod's receiving through other Jewish people.
Well, and the fact that Herod had all these guards and had Peter chained to 2 guys and had other sentries.
Yeah.
We talked last week about the fact that showed he knew about the disciples being miraculously freed earlier from jail, right? But so his response, so it says in the story, he interrogated him, didn't find anything, ordered that they be killed or executed, and then he left, right? What else could Herod have done instead of leaving?
To doubt Peter.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what would seem to be more in keeping with the personality we see of Herod so far? I mean, if you got a guy who's had one guy killed, was going to have another guy killed, had all these guards killed, and now the one that he was trying to kill has escaped. I mean, what else could he have done instead of leaving town?
Well, it seems, I'm not sure if we talked about this last week, he saw that it pleased the crowd to kill James, so he also brought Peter. So he just seems like a people pleaser. And even how he dies later, it's going to testify to that more.
We get there next week.
The worms. But
Boys.
it just seems like he's a coward to some extent, but also the people.
Okay.
Like if I saw a leader of a sect that's at least 8,000 people, more at that time, I would probably just be like, okay, I need to go to Roman territory, which is Caesarea, away from Judea
Yeah.
to be more safe.
Well, and I wondered too. So he's at least heard of all the things that God has been doing. Peter now escapes his grasp. He interrogated the soldiers, has them killed, but at the same time, like, he's having to understand that they literally are going, we have no idea. He was right here.
Yeah.
And so you wonder if there isn't some sense of fear of the Lord in him, and like if he isn't running away to some extent, because he recognizes that there's just something greater at work here and he's not in control of it.
Ooh. Wow. Yeah. You know, in the story, we looked at the fact that they're praying, but you know, God sends them the answer, and they don't even recognize it instantly. You know, so it just kind of indicates they're not praying with the faith that so many. Hey guys, this is Butch. I just wanted to let you know. I know this video kind of cut off randomly without warning. We actually got into some discussion in our spiritual application of the story that I thought might be just a little bit too sensitive to add to the video. So just didn't want you thinking that we just stopped. Although that is what happened. The GoPro got hot as well, but I started to get up and turn it back on, but I realized probably not a bad thing that it stopped when it did. So appreciate you watching the video. Just remember, at the end, there is a subscribe button, and would love to have you join with us there. Till the next time, keep on telling those Bible stories.